Good evening. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you on behalf of the Sher-Gil Sundaram Arts Foundation. My name is Latika Gupta and I work at the foundation as Director Projects. To briefly introduce SSAF, it was established in 2016 with the mandate to carry forward the legacy of scholar and photographer Umrao Singh Sher-Gil, his daughter and a pioneering figure of modern Indian art, Amrita Sher-Gil, and her nephew and niece, artist Vivan Sundaram, who will be speaking today, and filmmaker and television journalist Naveena Sundaram. Since its inception, the foundation's mandate has been to support and enable conjunctions of artistic and cultural practice that deal with historical memory, with a view towards futurities based on secular principles and freedom of expression. SSAF is committed to advancing creative independence and supporting alternative and heterodox practices. And I'd encourage all of you to visit our website, ssaf.in, for details about the various programs of the foundation. The SSAF lab that is hosting this discussion was set up as an incubatory space for discursive, processual, and experimental strategies of practice. It lends itself to interdisciplinary dialogue through multiple forums, such as workshops, talks, symposiums, screenings, and longer duration practice-based projects that further the objectives of the foundation. This evening, we are delighted to have a stellar panel for a discussion around Portal, the curious account of Achintya Bose by Shan Bhattacharya, who was the first recipient of the Umrao Singh Sher-Gil Grant for Photography. So welcome Shohini Ghosh, Rimli Bhattacharya, Ranu Roy Chaudhary, and of course, Shan himself. And you can read all the brief biographies in the chat box. Well, the book Portal has been published by SSAF Tulika Books, a co-publishing initiative between the Sher-Gil Sundaram Arts Foundation and Tulika Books. SSAF Tulika Books publishes a range of books on artists, the art and cultural studies, which includes art historical, critical, and theoretical writing. Before I hand over to my colleague Gayatri Uppal, a few housekeeping points. We would like to inform all of you that this event is being recorded. We also request you to please keep your audio and video off throughout the event. And lastly, please put your comments and questions in the chat box below, where you are reading the bios. These will be moderated and addressed by the panelists in the last 15 minutes or so of the event. Over to you, Gayatri.
Thanks, Latika. Good evening, everyone. By way of introduction, I'm Gayatri Uppal, Associate Director at the Sher-Gil Sundaram Arts Foundation. I will briefly speak about the Umrao Singh Sher-Gil Grant for Photography. The Umrao Singh Sher-Gil Grant for Photography was established in 2016 to recognize a photographer's commitment to the staged or constructed image. There is a distinction, albeit a fine one, between the staged and the constructed image. Regardless, both genres reflect on the transformative nature of the photograph, and photographers who began a project and need financial assistance to complete their work. The relationship of Umrao Singh Sher-Gil, born in 1870 and died in 1954, with photography during his lifetime was a private affair, his principal subjects being his family and himself. He tended to be overshadowed by the emblematic presence of his daughter, the artist Amrita Sher-Gil. It was in 2007 that Umrao Singh was recognized as a photographer of considerable importance. His self-portraits span almost 60 years and make up a unique archive. He is now regarded as a pioneering figure of the mise-en-scène or stage photography in India. The past recipients of the Umrao Singh Sher-Gil Grant for Photography are Shan Bhattacharya, who's with us in 2016, Prajakta Potnis in 2017, Ashish Sahu in 2018, Aishwarya Arumbakam in 2019, and Komal Mistry in 2020. I will now hand over to Vivan Sundaram, founder and managing trustee of the Sher-Gil Sundaram Arts Foundation, who worked closely with the book project Portal, the curious account of Achintya Bose, to say a few words. Thank you.
Ustal, the chairperson, an important curator and director of a well-known museum of photography in Austria, after announcing the runners-up dramatically paused to name the winner. Then he said, I will let him speak for himself. In walked a tall, slim man wearing jeans and a cap like a baseball player. If you go to the website, ssaf.in, you can see him with the jury members. He had submitted 10 very different photographs with no particular aesthetic attribute. His concept note had impressed the jury. He read it with a quiet confidence. Although an amateur, he is a sophisticated thinking photographer, as you might have read in the invite. The cover of the book Portal signals Shan Bhattacharya's playful and provocative approach. This can be seen as a scrapbook without the owner's name. Diverse data has been collaboratively put together. These with subversive intentions includes poor quality photographs and faded, unreadable archival material. The gestalt of image, text, and design questions the notion of good design. The images can be illustrations for the text as a group, thematically connected, or is a jump cut to a completely different reference in the diary. Bhattacharya is a photographer who poses his characters for a film, constructs them for advertising, as well as informally shoots for the family album. These are consciously embedded as part of a history of photography from the private and public domain. The crossover of Bengali and English forms the main grid of text that weaves the plot of relationships from a detective thriller to a historical drama. Numerous people span a large range, but it's the young woman Bhattacharya describes who seemingly does not age, playing diverse roles in different contexts spanning the 20th century. The montage traverses spatial and temporal time, producing a Chris Marker language from stills or a Godardian episodic jump cuts. Bhattacharya has the last word. In its completed form, will assume the characteristics of a hoax. With these few thoughts, I believe that the three main speakers, along with Bhattacharya, with their sophisticated articulation on photography, literature, and film, will bring a complex set of ideas and narratives to the table. A postscript. Is there a potential to develop from Portal's archive of reject stills to evolve a script of moving images, or more ambitiously, a film script for a radical cinema? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vivan, for that introduction. And before Shohini, you come on, we'll see some images from the inside pages of the book for under a minute. And then Shohini, over to you after that.
Can I begin?
Yes, please.
Thank you for those images, Latika. And it has given, I think, everybody a sense of what the book really looks like. And when the book begins, the curious account begins, Achintya Bose, who is the eponymous hero of this entire narrative, has gone mysteriously missing. And before he had gone missing, he had summoned Tariq, who is a repairer of cameras, and he's also described as the famed excavator of photographic ruins, to come and visit him. But by the time Tariq arrives with Shan Bhattacharya, the man has already gone missing, and his landlord wants to sell off the studio as quickly as possible. And while everybody is looking through all the things that Achintya Bose has left behind, Shan Bhattacharya discovers that there is a personal diary, and he slips it in his bag and brings it home. And through the rest of the book, he is the avid reader of this diary. And the many of the pages that you saw are actually from this diary, written in Bengali. And at the back, there is a translation for those who might be worried that they won't understand what the book says. But what is interesting is that this diary that Shan Bhattacharya becomes kind of preoccupied with is a kind of a personal archive of history and memory, and it is made up of diary entries, extracts from letters, extracts from books, all kinds of different kinds of photographs. It's got cover jackets of books. It's got advertisements. It's got newspaper clippings, and it's also got material that has been gathered by an unknown British intelligence officer. But what it also has primarily are these photographs of this kind of a mysterious woman who keeps appearing at different points of the story. And Achintya Bose gets all very obsessed with it. The first time he sees her in person is when she comes with a newly married husband to take her photograph in the studio, and he takes a photograph and they pay the money, but they never come back to collect the photograph. And then this photograph remains with Achintya Bose. And then strangely, what happens is that while he doesn't quite meet her again, or so we think, her photographs keep coming to him from different kinds of places. So we don't quite know whether he is going in search of these photographs or the photographs are finding him. And in this kind of a situation, he is trying to figure out who is this person. And increasingly, this Achintya Bose, as we gather from the diary, becomes increasingly obsessed with who is this woman? And these questions begin to haunt him. Who is this person? Why is she appearing in all these different places and different points in history, in different kinds of social and historical circumstances? And they're all separated by several decades or many years. And yet, interestingly, she looks the same. She looks kind of young. And so it's a kind of a mystery. And this quest becomes the driving spine or the driving force of the book, around which different kinds of narratives then begin to gather. Now, this book is a kind of, open-ended. So all these questions that, Achintya Bose is asking, who is this woman? Does she have a doppelganger? Is she one person, or, are there many who look like her? These questions are not resolved in the book. And and that is actually what is interesting, because the reader is then kind of invited to participate in seeking out these kinds of answers. And because this is kind of productive of all kinds of different kinds of thinking, we hope that many of those questions in some ways will be addressed by all of us, who have gathered here to talk about the book. Now, if you look at the cover of the book, and you saw it in the image, the first image that was shown, it's very interesting because on the cover is an envelope, and I'm sure that all of us have seen this envelope before, because whenever you go to a photo studio, you're given your prints and negatives back in this kind of an envelope. And this particular envelope is from the Bose Color Studio. And when you look at it and you read the Bose Color Studio, and if you open the book, it opens upside down. And then you have to turn the book upside down to realize that the name on the receipt is Portal. And now if you open the book, you will be able to read it. So you realize that right from the beginning, this is your first clue that the book is not what it appears to be. And therefore, it is not a kind of it's not a book of history. It is not a book of evidentiary material, which it looks like, but it is actually an elaborately fabricated and constructed fictional archive. And this is actually very interesting because this particular form, and we will talk about this a little later in our discussion, is actually a very productive form. And I hope that during our discussion, we are able to talk about what does this kind of fictionalizing do in our understanding of history or our understanding of the psychology of the people that we are talking about. So with these preliminary comments, I will hand it over to Shan to give us a presentation about his book, and then we will return to discuss this book with Rimli and Ranu and myself and Shan. Go ahead, Shan.
Thank you, Shoini, for the describing the book so beautifully, and thank you everyone for joining. So, talking about the book itself is a rather kind of walking a tightrope, actually. So I would rather begin with what sort of situations led me to practice, to turn my photographic practice into a product like this, rather the motivations behind it. So actually in and around 2014 or so, I was the kind of photography projects that I was doing, and when I was trying to make something out of all the photographs that I've been taking, or trying to come up with a new project. So I noticed that the very essence of the 20th century photography that some of the photographers that I kind of began idolizing, they were idolized mostly because they developed some kind of personal styles or aesthetics, or a kind of photographic language, or sticking consistently to a certain kind of looking. But at the age of internet, when you are always bombarded with so many influences, often the influences are contradictory, and then trying to find your own way of looking, I found that task, for me, it was difficult. So I was looking for a project where I could imbibe all the different influences that I've been living with at that point. And also the second thing would be this form of a photo book, that as what we traditionally know photo books for. I would kind of, let me share my screen at the point where I have this. Is it visible now? Yeah, yes. So this is one of my favorite books that I didn't get to see before I embarked on working on Portal. This is a book by Duane Michaels, Take One and See Mount Fujiyama. So this is a book where the individual photographs, they kind of accentuate and they kind of drive forward a singular narrative, and the photographs are sort of arranged as if they're screenshots of a running movie. So this is the kind of way I encountered a few photo books where the individual photographs, they become the driving force of the narrative, but the cut, the edit, the assemblage is invisible. And then there was like the many other photo books that I was encountering at that point was like kind of reminded me of this thing, the early Soviet montage sort of thing, that unrelated images like put one after another and like together, like seen in succession, means something more than the individual images would convey. And then I came across books like this. This is Joan von Kuberta's Fauna, where the image, the individual photographs are not like treated as narrative devices, or like rather they are treated as like the objects of interest in the book. The book is not made up of these images, rather the book is about these images. So this is the kind that influenced Portal the most, because like I tried to make a book where like I wouldn't have to depend on the succession or the playful juxtaposition of the individual images to drive a narrative, or I would not like treat the individual image, describe what the book is about. Rather, the book is about the images themselves. The book will not, like the other elements of the book, the text or the design, they will not like speak around the images, but they will speak directly about them. So with these thoughts in the beginning, I started like coming up with the initial fictional like container, which is the detective story, which Shorini just spoke about. So that kind of like played the part of the container where these images would reside. And before like getting the grant, like throughout the entire 2015, I worked with like cameras, different cameras, and studied like my personal favorite photographs, like from different era, and where they occupy different parts and different like rather niche of photographic history, and decidedly made a point that the entire collection would not reflect any particular photographic style, or rather they would take from as many as possible, and then like in collection they will fit right in. So therein lies the necessity of something that holds everything together, which at that point was the trope of the woman who doesn't age. So I was very fortunate to work with Oroma, a friend of mine, who modeled for all these photographs. And in the beginning, it was like weekend sessions with period clothing. We would raid our parents' and grandparents' closets and find clothes. We would borrow cameras from my friends, and often like incorporated some different period details into the photograph, and tried out techniques, and like kind of reaching a particular point where it's not only the look or the clothes or the surroundings that makes an image look like they belong to a certain era, but also the way the people behave in front of camera. So I like kind of I had to spend some time like reaching.
Microphone on. May I ask everybody to mute? Yes, I think Shan, you can continue.
So one of my friends, after reading the book, said that like it looks like you are having a cosplay party with your friends. I mean, he's not entirely untrue in this regard, because I would always I would ask for my friends' help only to pose in the photographs, and like I would ask them to like get your parents or grandparents' clothes in, and so that's how. And we would also like I would schedule my photo shoot sessions around like our random holiday destinations to do the things together. So at that point, after working like this for a year, I met Kolkata-based artist Manos and Madhuban at the queue of a film, I think a film festival screening, and I shared this idea of this project with them, and it was them who suggested that I should apply for the Umrao Singh Sher-Gil grant, the inaugural Umrao Singh Sher-Gil grant, and I didn't know of it at that point. So, and I found out that it was like the deadline is within 9 days. So, but I eventually applied, and it turns out that like the jury decided to award me the grant and continue with this idea, which I would say became like an immense boost, not only in terms of finances, but also like opening up a lot of possibilities in terms of gathering resources, because like I was now able to rent cameras, like arrange for shoots in locations, and like rent clothes from the film production houses and other props. So not only things like that, but also it kind of helped me to expand the project, like expand the scope of the project, and to in terms of not only the kind of photographs that I was taking, but also the issues that I was addressing before I received the grant. So I was able to like make contact prints and test prints, and like hire lighting and studios and all that stuff, and like also hire not professional actors in not just my friends, and like making them pose for my projector. But at that point, this became a more of a like a steady practice then on, in 2016 onwards. And so, but what I also, in terms of research, that I used to base my photographs on like the like individual photographs from my family album, or like my friends' family albums, or old journals and stuff. But I also got to access sort of kind of other historical archives, like the SSAF archive in Calcutta, and to read and more about the earlier photographic practices of Bengal and try to draw influences from there. So in terms of expanding the project, it's not about just the finances or the resources. It's also about research materials as well. So they sort of broaden the sphere, if you like to put it that way. And then in 2017, I began to accumulate the photographs and the individual elements together and began experimenting with the form of the book. And although initially it was my idea that the book would represent a journal, or rather the book would mimic a handwritten journal. But before 2017, there was no pre-decided form to it. But in 2017, when the individual handwritten letters and some of them, or then the photographs and the prints came in, then I was looking for inspirations to how the structure of the book what should it resemble? And at that point, I am sort of impressionable that way, because the kind of movies I am watching, or the books I'm reading, or the personal experience I'm going through, they directly influence the work that I'm doing at the moment. So I was reading Roberto Bolaño's The Savage Detectives at that point, and I thought that this is a fantastic structure that I should take influence from, while also Mark Zidanielewski's House of Leaves. Books like this, where where you have to go back and forth, and which is not a linear narrative, and there are many voices coming in a single book, and there are many materials to take notice of, so that in some later pages it would refer to a previous material that has been printed previously in a previous page. So I was looking at books which do not flow in a line, do not follow a linear narrative, but kind of like a labyrinthian structure in it. So, but that would require different voices in writing as well, because the book contains pieces not only written by the writer of the diary, that's Achintya Bose, also torn pages from books or other journals or letters. So then again, I had to take help from my friends, because even if I told them the basic of what that particular piece of writing is about, but the language is the voicing of individual, the other individuals, that kind of led to more, I would say, that's this literary jerk that you when you read the book, you read a journal written in Bengali, and then the next page you read a like a handwritten letter in English. And so different kind of writers, and like if they are written by different people. So to do that, I think 12 of my friends helped me in this this particular pursuit. For example, this one is written by this is a obituary of a fictional playwright and novelist, a Bengali playwright and novelist, who is based on a real person, but not one particular real person. So I only asked my friend Swadesh Misra, who is a writer and poet, and I just gave him 2-3 lines about this. So the entire thing is, the rest of it is entirely his own, like reimagination of the premise. And this is also one of the similar examples. This is like a nearly faded handwritten letter in French, written by a small girl in Chandannagar, writing to her pen friend overseas. So this was written by Dhritobroto Tato Bhattacharya, who is whom I met after after I got the grant and was looking for other collaborators. So this also is primarily his own composition. I just provided 2 or 3 lines of context. So after that, I began working with my friend and frequent collaborator Shomodip Ghosh in designing various other elements of the book, not just the diary pages, but also like the printed advertisements and the other individual materials. And Shomodip and I share a lot of similar headspace. Like I'm pulling this particular ad up because this took only 2 hours to build. I just had to tell him that, like, do you remember those old Chesme glycerin soap ads from like the Shanunda magazines that our mothers used to keep? And he just got this instantly, and he said that, like, do you have a image ready where Poroma looks prim and can be used in this type of ads? And like the rest of it came around in a couple of hours or so. So, but apart from that, if you consider the journal, handwritten journal form and my decision to keep the journal as it is and not try to transcribe the journal into a more good-looking book design, because I wanted to take this aesthetic of clutter, this chaos. There's so many elements in a page. There is a photograph and there is an insert, there is a handwritten text and the markings and the dirt and everything. I wanted to keep this clutter, but in a logical context, because like in general, the books on photography or photo books in general, like they often tend to like go into the direction of a very properly measured, and like there's often this tendency to use blank space, and the design kind of complements the attention of the viewer towards a particular thing, towards a photograph. But that I always felt that comes from a certain, how should I put it, a culture of excess. Like there's too many blank pages and there's only one single thing in a single page. So rather, I wanted to like take influence of a kind of culture of accommodating, like various elements together, like as in a crowded train in office hours. Like if you have no business in being there, then it would seem like a endless chaos. But if you know where you're going, then you'll find out that everything has a certain logic to be placed in that particular landscape. So I sort of drew influence from that, and this, like the design would not complement the attention of the viewer to the particular photograph. Rather, the attention could be strewn all over the spread, and the viewer can choose where to look at their own choice, rather.
Shan, I was wondering whether I could just come in at this point and say that, can you hold on to some of your wonderful material for some time? Because I think a lot of it might just come up in the discussion that Ranu and Rimli will have. And so don't give us all the treasure at once, but keep it for the rest of the conversation.
Yes,
so,
sure.
Yeah, and just maybe you want to sum it up just for this round, and then of course we'll come back to you.
Sure. So that's basically like my idea of my motivation for this particular design choice anyway. And just one more point is that my decision to let go of the medical obsession that there will be like one page and there's a print pasted on another, but they are done in a flat scan. So that was kind of what I envisioned while producing this book. So that's about it. I mean, I only wanted to speak about some of the motivations behind some of the choices that I made. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Shan. That was actually very, very fascinating, the kind of behind the scenes that you have given us. And we will keep coming back to you because I know that we have many questions also for you. So I'm now going to ask Ranu to speak, and I'm sure she will also have many questions to ask you. Go ahead, Ranu.
Thanks, Sohini. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Let me know if there's any trouble.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shan, for giving a fantastic overview, and you have done half of my job. And I'm truly grateful, and for sharing a major chunk from your book as well as from behind the scene. So, and this is to the audience that you have already figured out that this book is not simply about the story that it has to tell. I mean, as much it is about Achintya Bose and his obsession, it is also about the materiality of photographic images and the book as an object. So, and Shan's work fascinatingly draws our attention beyond the narrative, like the story that the book has to tell. So, and that's why, Sohini began by showing the book cover where you have an envelope, and these envelopes actually exist everywhere. And let me share my screen at this point to show you a real envelope from a real world studio. I hope the envelope is visible, right? So this is an envelope from the Savoy Camera Store, and as you can see, it's 4 Chaurangi Road, the heart of Calcutta. And this is pretty much from the 1980s and 1990s, the time period where Shan sets his story. And you can figure that out from the phone number here. I mean, the 6-digit phone number actually signals like the late 80s, 90s. I mean, this was pretty much a time I was also memorizing our ancestral home's phone number. So, and you can see the kind of services and kind of other things, so albums, films, these were also like advertised on the envelope. So these were like, this is the first thing that you encounter, and you know what the kinds of services these spaces offer. Now, from going from Chaurangi to Mofassil, did it move? Mofassil neighborhood photography store. So on top you had, both are from Hooghly, and it's very difficult to find out these places. And if I go back, I mean, I'll have a hard time figuring out as well. So on top left, you have this quality photo studio, and to the right next to it is the proprietor of the studio. And bottom is the studio and its proprietors. So, and Achintya Bose should be kind of a person who'd resemble these people, I mean, who exist out there in real world. And Achintya Bose's studio is, the address is Shobha Bazar, but in the narrative it says Bug Bazar. So whatever, the Bug Bazar, Shobha Bazar, Ahiritola area in the 1990s is where I spent a lot of my time. And so I can vouch for how small studios in this tiny bike lanes would look like. And they would have this reception. So first you have the storefront, and from the storefront, you have the reception area where you have all these different kinds of photographs stuck. I mean, they also work as the sample of their product. So, and here you can see a Nova written here right on top, if you can locate that. And that Nova produced films as well as photosensitive paper for printing. So all these objects, and these are like the printing paper boxes, and all these tiny little objects are here and there, you'll find everywhere. And these photographs are from about like 4 years back, but you can still find these studios everywhere in and around Kolkata. From here on, and this is how the second layer of these studios would look like. So first you have the storefront, then you have the reception area, and then you go into the actual space where the photographs would be made, and there would be backdrops. And this is exactly the location where this couple from Nona Chandanpukur came to get photographed in Achintya Bose's studio, and sparking Achintya Bose's obsession with the wife. And they never came back for the print. And you can see all the cartons here. So the cartons are for passport size photograph. For regular photographs, you have these backgrounds, and the cartons will be pulled over to give a uniform background to passports. And of course, these are lights that are not particularly in use. In this studio here, I mean, they use some light for producing. And the next layer would be the dark room. And you can see the safe light here. And again, the boxes that contain paper. This is the enlarger that's covered in with a cloth, a piece of cloth. And this is the kind of photographic ruin that was found in Achintya Bose's studio and in adjacent rooms. And Shan, along with other people that he mentions in the book, they actually navigated through this kind of a maze to retrieve many of the materials. Well, they found, and most importantly, the journal. Now, these would be the albums. Again, when the clients come, yeah, they would show these albums as their samples, and the bottom right is from a reception area of the Das studio. And these two albums are from a previous era. You can see these are like the a black and white photograph, and then bottom right is the color photographs. And these are also kind of things that make their way into Shan's visual and linguistic narrative. So and going back to the previous slide, okay, and this is kind of like, this is something that Christopher Pinney would call the chamber of dreams. And that dream would kind of get materialized through the darkroom and to this kind of a photograph. And this is a photograph that Mr. Das approved, that this is like a uniformly lit, nicely done photograph that you can hold on to for future and reference back with cherished memories. And this is where the book begins, Shan's book really begins. And but at the same time, as Shan said, that there are many moments of intertextual referencing through which Shan's move makes a major move from history of studio photography to other forms of photographic practices that have featured in the Indian history of the medium. And here you have, I mean, I could not help but see this this kind of quotation from Pablo Bartholomew's work. This one, as well as the one following here, both of them kind of refer back to a particular period and the style and a particular photographer. But at the same time, what these kind of juxtaposition also alert us is how the artistic intentionality and individual artists with their signatures on the prints would be named in the history, while people like Achintya Bose would not have a name in the history. I mean, they will just remain as one of many owners of photographic studio who made the specific kind of photograph. So like having an authorial voice vis-a-vis just being a commercial studio owner and practitioner is what we can find once we see these two side by side. And maybe Shan can talk a little bit more on that. Another layer, so first you have, so Shan basically masterfully layers his archive. So there are like kind of a three-tiered archive layering that's happening. So the first is the material traces of the history of photography. So the materiality of the print, the chemicals, the darkroom, everything there. And from there on, you go on to think about the history of style, and we begin with the first. So the first photograph in the book is of this Nona Chandanpur couple, followed by a photograph of Achintya Bose's friend's cousin and cousin's wife, and that's a silver bromide print. So what you can see from silver bromide through a Polaroid, this journey. So from a very formal, aesthetically choreographed photograph to photography becoming a practice of everyday life. I mean, that's also where the writer Nash comes in, and the kind of album where Nash's photographs are kept, and that's Chandu's album, right, Chan? So and those albums also show how photography is seeping into the everyday practices from this exclusively studio space. So there's this social history that's happening, and then history of style, of course, as I was saying. So you have this choreograph from choreography changes, and then you have the Polaroid. And the third layer, the book also addresses the historiography of photography in India. So to your left is a pioneering and encyclopedic book by Shan Bhattacharya. It's in Bangla, and unfortunately it has not been translated. And so it's called Chobi Tola Bangalin Photography Chorcha. The translation will be taking picture, Bengali practices in photography. And down here, I deliberately spelled photography with an I and not a Y to signal that photography is as much a Bangla word as it is English. And there are all these linguistic nuances that you can find in Shan's book. And at this point, I think I'll jump over to talk about a little bit about the language, and I would love to have Shan talk about them a little bit. So on page 39, there's a moment when Achintya Bose met this person in Trinkas and then writes in the diary how he needs to feed his memory. And the Bangla for that is, it's Sritir Godaye Jol Dhalte Hobe. So you basically watering the memory, the roots of the memory. And this kind of Sritir Godaye Jol Dhalte Hobe is a reference for me very much to Buddhir Godaye Dhua Dite Hobe. So you smoke a cigarette to spark these ideas, and that comes directly from Satyajit Ray and Feluda. And for me, this was this moment of Buddhir Godaye Dhua, and there was another moment, sorry, this was in page 23, and page 39 was where Achintya Bose meets a person and then says he needs to cultivate the person. Now that again goes back to this Feluda moment where in Shonarkilla, the Golden Fort, Jotayu, this writer friend of Feluda's, meets Feluda for the first time in the train and says, "Apnake to moshai cultivate korte hocche." So these are these moments I found absolutely fascinating. And then again, there are these words, and these the two instances that I gave you were kind of lost in translation, as it always happens. And but I really needed to point out these. And there are also specific words that talk about Shan's commitment to historically specific moments and linguistic uses. For example, jhap bandh korte hobe. So you close the shop. The shutter is actually jhap. So jhap, click is where you go to have a chat, and where Achintya Bose went after closing the jhap, that is closing the store. He would go have a chat with two of his friends. And these are some of the moments I really enjoyed in the language. And I would love to, again, Shan, please speak a little bit more about these language structure. I know you had collaborators and many of your friends helped you out with narrativizing this thing, but I would love to know a little bit more. And my other question, of course, would be about the production process. I mean, I know you talked a little bit about the behind the scenes stories, but I would love to know more about the kinds of format of camera, the films you used. We saw some, I mean, you used Ilford, I figured, but there were other stuff. So that choice of lens and all these things. So if you can talk to us a little bit about that, that'll be great. And of course, this intertextual referencing, not only to his like this history of photography that Achintya Bose produced, but also there were other print materials. So you showed us the advertisements. So, and there are other moments as well. So if you can talk to that more. I will just end my initial remarks by pointing out how how once we follow Achintya Bose's obsession about this woman who doesn't seemingly age and will actually inhabit these photographs produced in different historical moments and embody this historical specificity, it also like prompt us to think about the technomaterial core of photography and the meaning that is produced out of that technomaterial base. And that is a moment when we might think about photography as indubitable and at the same time meaningless. It's indubitable because, I mean, there was somebody, I mean, there was if the light reflected off the thing, whatever that is, was in front of the lens, but then the meaning always is fluid. So the verifiability, the indexical character that is often extended to the meaning beyond the photography, this technomaterial core, I mean, that gets challenged. And at the end of this book, Shan kind of doesn't venture into looking for this woman and exploring other avenues. And that's a moment we also understand how futile the project is to look for the real. So, and finally, it doesn't really matter if Achintya Bose existed or if any of the material or this archive that Shan put together existed. What matters is the archive that Shan put together is, I mean, it's kind of a mimetic practice. And at the same time, it's also a mnemonic tool that Shan offers us. So I'll stop at that point and maybe I can come back later. Thank you. Over to Shona.
Ranu, thank you very much. May I ask Rimli to turn her mic and camera on and speak? Rimli, are you there with us?
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead, Rimli.
Okay. Since a lot has been said about how the book was made, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I've been reading the book, and the two words that have come up are the unfound. And since I've been working a bit on theater in different urban spaces of India, I'm going to begin with what they would advertise as scenic illusions. Scenic illusions became a buzzword in theatrical advertisements in English, particularly for Bengali theatre from the 1870s, whatever might be the genre and content of the play. But if we go back a good 50 years ago, we chance upon an advertisement in the Englishman for an exhibition which was conducted by a certain Mr. Robertson, and I'm quoting, the exhibition was on the phantasmagoria, the phantascope, and pyrotechnics. The phantasmagoria, I mean, in case some of you don't know, because I didn't when I first read this advertisement, was a form of theater which used a modified magic lantern to project frightening images such as skeletons, demons, ghosts, etc. And the phantascope was a movable magic lantern, and I'm sure you know how those work. So this advertisement, which came out on 13th December 1837, was followed in less than a fortnight about the sale of equipment, the offer to teach a technician how to run this equipment, and a reminder that the owner was shortly sailing for home. In a visible chain of ghostly changing of hands, audiences, and spaces, we have a third advertisement by the new owner who announced a trained operator and the entry of this equipment into new spaces, that is, from private engagements exclusively for Europeans to public displays for a mixed audience. So the phantasmagoria, which had been invented in the 1790s and was introduced to the British Isles in 1801, actually became a craze in Imperial England, in colonial places, after the craze had died down in Europe, which still happens. And it's interesting that Walter Benjamin evoked it centrally in his 1939 version of the Arcades project. So why do I evoke this primitive apparatus when we have before us this exquisitely produced book, conscientiously, carefully, imaginatively crafted, with a superb amount of attention to detail, which you heard from Shan himself. And I must say that I have not spoken with any of the panelists or with Shan, so I was really happy to hear him talk about the things that I sort of missed in the book. I'll be very honest. The reason why I wanted to bring before you the phantasmagoria, obviously, is because some of the favorite words in English and Bangla that come up in the book itself is, these words are uncanny, coincidental, ghostly, random, and so on. They just, at some point you feel you're being bombarded by them. And so I said, okay, if I'm going to be bombarded, I'm going to take it up right by the scruff of its neck and work on it. There is obviously a great attention paid to this, to simulation, not just to impersonation, not just to staging and constructing and crafting, but to the very nature of verisimilitude and simulation. I think there's a potentially an absolutely radical tension between that. And the reason I say potentially perhaps will become clearer as we go on. In what I found on the website, the person who finally chose the grantee says it's a fantastic idea for the founders of the Sher-Gil Sundaram Arts Foundation to initiate a grant for the staged and the constructed image. And as I'm obviously not going to be trying to give an overview, I'll just talk about a few things which, as I said, which the reader feels compelled to, a reader such as me, feels compelled to pick up. And these are not necessarily the ones which would probably get a lot of attention, which is, okay, what is this intertextuality doing here? What is this visual cue doing here? I leave that for, you know, individuals to find out and figure out. I was more interested in it really as, okay, what is this book then? It is beautiful, it is exquisite, it is it's seductive, it's dizzying in all its references. But where am I moving with this? I'm not necessarily moving in a linear way, but where am I moving, or in which directions am I going? And so the very first page is strewn with cues and time tags, and one pauses momentarily to see if in the mind they can be reconfigured by the reader viewer to generate other narratives, perhaps in a Calvino-like fashion, which are perhaps not so immaculately conceptualized. That's the primary response I had, which was to, in a way, almost want to move out of this very perfect and very beautifully, and I don't just mean perfect in terms of the production, I mean perfect in terms of all the cues and the all the assemblage that's there. You know, I sort of wanted, in fact, then to make those other leaps, or as Vivan said, jump cuts, so what did I take along with me on this reading journey, which of course didn't happen in one day or in one sitting. I mean, I was browsing, and the book was sent to us quite a while ago. So I had the opportunity of moving back and forth, and of actually, I can say this, sometimes not even, in fact, very often not reading it in a chronological way. I would sometimes look at the English translation, but not to compare it with the Bangla one. I want to make this clear. I was just reading them as different things that were there. And being a literature scholar at heart and sort of in my bones, and also a lover of the visual, that was what impelled me to say that what are the few things that I do have to say. One is this, again, this heavy underlining of the nondescript, the unremarkable, and so on. You know, and so what did this do to me in terms of a cue? Did I completely consciously, in fact, ignore it and said, okay, this is a big joke? Of course, it's not going to be nondescript. Or did I actually engage with it at some length and say, well, it's incidentally, Achintya Bose is the name of a photographer. And my friend yesterday, from whom I borrowed the dongle because mine is unstable, actually showed me a photograph of his that she has. I won't go into it. So there are these, of course, not entirely uncanny, because Achintya Bose is not a very unique name, but there are these also very deliberately woven in references between someone who might be a composite, as Shan himself said, and that's what I felt. But the thing about unremarkable and nondescript came back to me in a very different way. This is Achintya Bose, that is the author of, the supposed author of this diary, is singularly silent about any aspect of photography. Not even commenting about the object of his search, that is about how she looks in all these absolute sort of, like a card, a pack of cards, all these photos of hers. Or how his thoughts of her change with the photos placed in various scenarios that pop up in his frenetic chase. It could be anyone writing that diary, I thought. He does not have to be an excavator of photographic ruins like the other person who Shohini also mentioned, Tariq. But is he not even remotely interested in the process, the equipment, the materiality? the arrangement of the subjects, and what you said, Shan, to add to this, to what I've scribbled down, the behavior of how a person faces a camera. I'm very camera shy myself, so I know, I mean, I just go through agonies, and whoever has to take the photo has, I'm sure, suffers equally. So why is there nothing about any of this? If his interest is finally piqued in a woman who appears to be mysterious, so I'm questioning that, and who certainly does not fit into the nondescript and the unremarkable. And if he is interested in faces and their relationship with identities, would it be unfair on my part as a reader, that is, not just as a reader of Achintya Bose, but as a reader of the first person narrator who may or may not be Shan, and of Shan, would it be unfair of me to expect a few stray lines about the face, its lines, shadows, contours, expressiveness, or impassiveness? Something about the emotions not found. So on page 5, sorry, we're given this is, I'm mixing up my pages. Or is the woman's face a device, as the formalists would say? And I was thinking of that very wonderful essay by Eichenbaum on Gogol's overcoat, how the overcoat was made. So is the woman's face purely a trigger that had to be brought into being to set him off into these quote unquote serpentine lanes of a scattered trail of stories and histories that finally, and this is my second point, are not so scattered after all. In fact, they make for a remarkably coherent tale. And I immediately was thinking of Virginia Woolf's fluid gender shifting, and of centuries, shifting across centuries and gender in Orlando. And so that's the literature me coming in. And this collapsed into a single century of a once thriving colonial city. Because the other interesting thing about Calcutta, this, I think, Partha Chatterjee told us once when we were talking about Calcutta, he said, it's probably the only city where people are actually moving out, which is getting depopulated. So these photographs seem to be lost, almost buried in the text. A frenetic text, no doubt, but finally very coherent, very well put together. So can these variously found photos, because he keeps finding them, can they be unmoored from the scribbles? Is there something unfound? So I'm going to stop here, Shohini, as you had first said. I have some more sections which I would like to read out if there's time, especially one last section, which is about the woman. That is my woman.
Okay.
But not now. So
that's very tantalizing, and we will certainly come back to that when we circle back. Rimli, you have raised a number of very interesting, points. And one thing that didn't strike me really, and you made me think about, you're now making me think about it now, is that how come this guy who is an artist and photographer, that is how he describes himself, doesn't make any, observations about the photographs. And perhaps, one of the reasons he doesn't do that is because he has already, become obsessed with this idea of finding this woman. And so in many ways, I find this book about many things, as, Ranu talked about the futility of searching for a reality, the unknowability of the past. But I also think it's a story and a cautionary tale about the pleasures and dangers of mystery and fascination, and also the thin line between fascination and obsessiveness and obsession. And it's towards the end of Achintya's obsession, it kind of almost verges on madness, because there's one point where he goes to the thinly veiled Siddhartha Ghosh and says, I'm wondering whether I should tell him this, but if I tell him, do you think he'll think I'm mad? And then there's one quote that, I'll just read out for everybody. And he says, because this is an undated diary entry by Achintya Bose, and he says, there's a problem somewhere and it's happening with me. I just can't express it. How can I write about it if I can't even construct my thoughts? Of late, it freaks me out to look at an old photograph. What if I encounter a ghost? And when I was, the book lingers on with you even after you've read it. And as I was thinking about the book, I was constantly also being reminded about Avery Gordon's book on ghostly matters, where she talks about, the importance of looking at living traces and looking at the memories of the lost and the disappeared. And because she says that, this whole idea of the living traces and the memories of the lost and disappeared need to be honored because they lead us to a different kind of knowledge. And what she says is that they lead us to a knowledge about things behind things. And somewhere, this is what, the book seems to be trying to do. Now, Achintya is not the only person who is obsessed in this book. And the photographs of this mystery woman, and I'm really waiting to hear about, Rimley's take on it, because I seem to have a different take every day on her. She is really quite a fascinating character, but her photographs are like a contagion, because when Achintya Bose gets in touch with Riley Nash, writer who has now retired, now living very far away, and brings his attention to this photograph, he too gets obsessed with it. And then he begins to find her in different kinds of ways, or as I said, maybe the photographs find their way to him. So every time somebody is hooked onto it, it gets more and more of it. And then he finds a look-alike in a person who is supposed to be his aunt in a distant British tea estate. And so he also is obsessed with, becomes obsessed with the quest for this woman. And then at one point, he writes a letter to Achintya and he says, I have a dreaded sense of something closing in on us, even as we keep searching, as though we are somehow too close to the truth, and yet very far away. It might well be, on the other hand, that the closer we are to actually knowing, the further we are away from it. And then, of course, the most interesting thing happens right at the end, which is that all this while we think that Achintya Bose has never met this woman, we don't know where he has disappeared. And suddenly, the narrator, the first narrator, that is Shan, or the persona of him in the book, finds this shoebox of Polaroids. First, he finds a faded Polaroid, which has a date on it. And so we know that this is obviously something that, this photograph was something that he was familiar with. And then there's another shoebox full of Polaroids. And what do these photographs have? They are all about this woman that he has been obsessed with. Where did these Polaroids come from? Had he really met them? Then did he actually have an encounter with it? Or did the Polaroids kind of magically, mysteriously appear here looking for yet another prey? Perhaps this time, the narrator himself. And then the narrator, of course, says that, in the last line of the book, or his commentary is that, he is not going to tread that path. He's not going to fall into that path. Now, the question that we can ask is that then, has she gone out of our lives, or the lives of the protagonists of the book, of which Shan Bhattacharya is a part? And we find that right at the end, there is a kind of appraisal, or, in the form of an afterword by a cognitive neuroscientist, albeit fictional, who gives his kind of a rational explanation of what Achintya Bose, might have been. Is he a super recognizer, or, does he suffer from something else? So it seems that one could kind of interpret that as something of, finding a scientific rationale for what has happened, or finding a scientific way of banishing the ghosts. And of course, my question is to Shan that, do the ghosts really go away, or do the ghosts actually persist? Because if we go back to Avery Gordon's, work, and she talks about, and there are a lot of interesting disappearances in the book. People come and go, and then they disappear, they mysteriously disappear. And Avery Gordon talks about how there are two kinds of people who disappear. One disappears and then many years later comes back in flesh and blood to tell their story, but others do not come back. And when they don't come back, their apparitions come back, and they reappear as apparitions, as spirits, as specters. And those people then tell a story that cannot be repressed. And then she actually uses the word portal, interestingly, has many interesting contemporary connotations, but is also a gateway. And it just so happens, it is kind of coincidental that Avery Gordon talks about how the disappeared actually opens the other door. And so my question, of course, that I will end with is that, is there another door? Because one of the interesting things that we discover about the book is that how you allow, and I'm referring to to Shan, who is the creator of the book, along with his collaborators, that it allows us all to open our individual doors. And I would like to hear a little bit more about this theme of obsession, a fascination obsession that runs through the body of the book. So with that, I will now ask Shan. I know that it's not possible for you to remember everything that we have all said. So in any way or form that you remember, you can start responding, and then maybe at some point I can remind you to talk about something else, and then I will go back to the others for some quick responses. Go ahead, Shan.
Thank you, Shohini, and thank you, everyone. Because, but like taking the cue from you, I would say that this theme of obsession, that also something which Brimley mentioned, that Achintya Bose, as the writer of the diary, is obsessed about, in his quest in finding answers to why he's like encountering so many photographs of the person, but he doesn't really speak about her characteristics and doesn't really speak about her physical appearance in any way. So like, and while you mentioned about the obsession of Riley Nash, is that like Achintya and Riley Nash in the book, as I constructed it to be, I constructed them to be two different kinds of people. Achintya Bose is more like, I mean, of course, he runs a photography business, but he's not an artist. He is not particularly the creator, as you call an artist would be. He simply inherited the business, photographic business, from his own father. And he's like, at one point he writes that he doesn't really like photography anymore. He wants to close the business, and like, so it made sense to me to build him as sort of like a like kind of a bit of a nihilist, I would say, as a distant personality who doesn't really have a hobby, and like confronted with this kind of coincidences. After 2 or 3 coincidences, he makes the coincidence run his course, he makes the coincidence run his course of lives later on. It doesn't really matter it doesn't really matter to him like how the character looks like or how the character appears or anything. So he's more interested in the phenomena. Whereas Riley Nash, being a poet and a writer and a general creative person, so his kind of obsession, he's more obsessed with the person herself. So he has tried to seduce one like incarnation of her in one memory, and he's now confronted with another memory from years ago as his distant aunt. And like now his kind of obsession would allow him to like build imaginary contexts to things that may or may not exist. So, and this is primarily the reason why I put Nash's later communications and the photographs that he sent later on in a in the separate section of the book, which I, as the collector, would complete, but Achintya does not feel like it's necessary to include them in the occasion. So, and as for like what you had asked about this continuation of this obsession, so I would say that this particular kind of obsession of finding someone in the vast realm of photography does not really, in the age of internet, like the post-millennial age, so to speak, this book particularly is a product of 20th century and 20th century itself. How people encountered photographs in 20th century, the amount of visual information, the amount of photograph, the sheer number of photographs that a single person comes across is markedly different in 21st century and in 20th century. So if someone is to continue this obsession sitting at 21st century, it would become a quest of another kind. It would become like one of those, hackers that you see like surrounded by monitors and VPNs and stuff like that. So that comes under the purview of another project, I would say.
Okay. Ranu and Rimli, would you like Shan to respond to something before we go to the second round of our comments?
Sure. I mean, I'll actually pick on your earlier point about the title of the book as Portal. And I absolutely love the way, it was mediating, working as a portal between this kind of photographic tradition and their oblivion, like sitting, as Shan rightly pointed out. I mean, we live in a different image era, and this book is very much an archive and a product of the 20th century. And that's pretty much no more. Somebody says that Ranu's voice is not clear. Okay, can you hear me all right?
It's a little bit unclear, but continue anyway, because I don't know whether we can do anything about it right now.
I don't know, because everything seems fine on my side.
Okay, it's a little bit better, but you can be understood. Just speak a little.
Okay,
slow.
Great. So what I was telling, that how it was mediating between like the history of practice and the way it doesn't exist anymore, pretty much. So and I wondered if Shan wanted to talk a little bit more about his choice of the title, and together with my other questions about his specific linguistic emphasis on take and gulmara, for example. So lying, it's not simply lying, but much more than that. I mean, it encompasses a generational speech pattern. And of course, the intertextual referencing and behind the scene. I'm so interested to know more about the behind the scene stories.
So, do you want me to speak first about the title?
However you want to go about it. I mean,
yes, go ahead, Shan. Whatever order you want to respond.
I don't have really much to speak about the title specifically. The project did not have a title when I applied for the grant. So it's for the application, the title came in a flash. I mean, and it made sense that portal would be a fitting name for something which is singular, but looking through it would you could go to any particular space-time, particular instant in a space-time continuum, things like that. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't really explain much on it.
And there was a second question.
Oh, I wanted to reflect on. So maybe you want to talk first about how you produce the images, your choice of camera, choice of lens, choice of film, and those things, and maybe we can from there we can move on to the writings stuff. Yeah, some behind the scene stories.
Behind the scenes stories, well, like I can tell you about what I could not do. For example, like I really wanted to.
I think that will be great to know what you couldn't do. Yeah, I'm sure. Go ahead.
Like I would have loved a photograph with a like a vintage car in a like older into 2016 I went to the vintage car rally that happens in Calcutta. So, and like I came across this particular car which is like a 1910 Morris, and it made so much sense, and to like construct a particular snippet of narrative around it and to get it somehow included in a particular photograph. And I was like thinking that maybe I should do this with a wet plate collodion and stuff. And I sourced the camera from a friend, and the camera did not have a wet plate collodion mount back, so I made it from a carpenter. And then like we were on the process of getting the chemicals ready. But at that point, and initially when I contacted the owner of the particular car, and so I told him about the project, and I like dropped names, like the SSAF and everybody, so that he gets convinced and everything. But like he was just 2 or 3 days before the shooting session, he inexplicably canceled on it. And I was like so sad for a couple of weeks that I couldn't work. And like that is one regret that I really have. Like when I came down, like editing the pictures and like making the book, like looking at all the contact sheets and the negatives and everything else, every time I do that, I get reminded of that particular incident that, I could not source a vintage car. So, yeah. But other than that, in general, like I got to use, because that was my motivation all along, that to be able to use as many types of cameras and films as possible, like primarily educational purpose, because it's not like every day you hook up with an excuse to use a 110 spy camera and all that. So that was fun.
Shalini, Topodidi has a question that kind of goes with what Shan was talking about. I mean,
Okay,
it's this absence of specific thing, and I wondered if you want to take that. I don't know.
Ranu, I think what we will do is that we will follow, that we will just go to have Rimli do her concluding
of course
about the woman that we are all waiting to hear, and then we will actually start taking questions.
Of course. I mean, I just thought, it's a nice correlation between the question and what Shan just said.
Great. Just hang.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And I think Latika will pick that up. And now we will go to the much awaited, section that Rimli will talk about her take on this woman. Go ahead, Rimli.
Well, you might be disappointed. So it's, as I said, one of the meandering paths that I've chosen to take as a reader.
Yeah.
And the two things, one is, since Shan just talked about the car, I was very curious. And so this is not being posed as a question to you, Shan, but maybe later on we can have a discussion, that you do make a reference to a certain Bajoria who photographs himself with his Ford car. And that's about the only reference I got to the presence, the huge, overwhelming presence of, quote unquote, non-Bengalis in the city. So my woman, or one of my many women who have emerged from your many women, actually is, this Achintya Bose's otherwise frenetic imagination is actually pretty, as I said, very coherent and well formulated and well locked within the grid of the, I would say, fairly beautiful, upper class, educated, bright, progressive Bangali Bhadramila. You know, I've no problems with that. That's what he is. What can one do? That's him. But there are some very interesting sections where you bring in the Eurasian thing. I found that to be one of the most, actually, the most, as I said, that is the unfound for me, which needs much more. And of her, those two photographs that were not included by Gautam Rudra in his article, cross-dressed. And it's so, the crossover between that and theater actresses of the time and earlier is very, very fascinating. So there's a whole genealogy there that is hinted at. And I think for me, those are the richest areas of the book, not where there's an overburdening with clues and cues, but where there are these almost fleeting transitory connections. The second one was, so these are women that I literally plucked out from his book, but maybe turned them into something else for the future, since it's a portal and since Vivan was also talking about doing other things. So one was the Eurasian, and the other is, I mean, could be a Marwari woman, maybe Mr. Bajoria's daughter or wife lurking behind the fort, I don't know. And also it could be the Armenian Jew. So many of those Jews, so many of those areas that you're talking about are, you know, even now in South Calcutta where I live, the only bit of open ground that's there is an Armenian Jewish cemetery. And the widow that you have, who's seen as an ethnographic subject and photographed, and who actually turns back to look at the photographer, who fixes her piercing gaze on him. That was yet another moment which I thought could be something else, you know, where there's a glimmer of emotion, where there's a glimmer of the subjective. So maybe that's what I'm missing. And why should you be obliged to provide all that I'm missing? So I'm providing it myself. And so my last few thoughts, because I know that we've run out of time, although I was very careful to time my earlier thing, is that I think what you also add to is this long history of genres of the city, of the colonial metropolis, which considered itself and was considered to be the second city of the empire, and which happily took, you know, not just the novel, but things like 19th century, things like the mysteries, you know, the Rahosya genre, the Gupta Katha, the secret stories, the underbelly of the city, and so on. And I think it's wonderful the way you actually then literally pull it out. So Banaras, of course, was a very, very regular place for these guys to go. So if you have a story set in Calcutta, sooner or later you'd end up in Banaras. But what you do with, say, Kurseong, the tea gardens, and that, again, that glimmer, which I just loved, of Purulia. He says, you know, he probably wants to go back to his maternal Mama Bari, you know, to Purulia. I think those, if there were more of those, for me, you know, it would have been exactly that kind of unfurling of and moving out in so many ways. It still does, but I mean, that's what I would have thought. And I'll just end with what, again, I think is not exactly uncanny, but maybe, again, a certain not linear genealogy. Siddhartha Ghosh's book has been brought up several times, and I'm glad it has, because print has a way of deadening sound, usually, unless you're, of course, a James Joyce. And one of the things when, before I had met Siddhartha Ghosh, I was struck by the titles of his books. And I swore, I made an oath that I'm not going to speak Bangla today, but I'm going to just repeat. So it's not, I'm not speaking, I'm just citing the titles and I'll translate them. One of his books, which orally rich book, which records the city's affair with machine and modernity is College Shahur, Kolkata, Calcutta, the city of machines and technology, and Chobitola, which was just shown. And I think, Ranu, you said practice, and that was my instinctive response too, to translate Bangali photography, photography chorcha as practice. But chorcha is something else. Chorcha is in the realm of the discursive. It has both the overtones and undertones of craft, of practice, of technology, of experimentation, and it moves into the realm of the informal in the discursive, the gossip, the innuendo, the sly or cheeky humor. And one of the titles of one of his chapters is, in fact, opens up to the portal for me, which is called Abcha Mulin Photography Shandhane, in search of the faded and stained photograph. So for me, this journey through your portal and through all my other own personal portals has been one of which leaves behind an after image or a sound. And the question, what if we found something by either this woman or somebody related to him or unrelated to her, but somehow related, which takes us to these other, as I said, these other unfound spaces. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Shohini, you'll need to unmute yourself, please.
I'm so sorry. I was just saying that, telling Rimli that she's made this excellent, conclusion for us, given us lots to think about. And now, Latika, you can go ahead with the questions.
Yes, so in the interest of time, I'm going to scrunch some of the comments, which in themselves are fabulous openings to much longer conversations. But Shamadeep Ghosh says that there is something about the mystery and uncanniness of Achintya Bose's character itself. And given the scant information we have about him and his eventual disappearance, adding an aura to the only picture that there is. Sabina Gadiok thanks everybody for a wonderful conversation. And she says that she was struck by what Shohini said a little while ago about the idea of a portal being a gateway to another world. It could also be a gateway to another time. And she talks about her work more than 2 decades ago, where she worked closely with, I assume you're being Shan's, eccentric professor Gautam Bhadro, Siddhartha Da, and his close collaborator, studio owner Bikash Da. And Siddhartha, even at the time, would raise all kinds of speculative ideas about the women photographers that he had written about in his chapter. And this is because there have always been gaps in this history. And Sabina feels that portal allows even the photo historian, who's often obsessed with evidence and facts, a mode of engaging with these gaps through a speculative account. Professor Taupati Guha-Thakurta has a question. And she congratulates you on this book, and she looks forward to a longer interaction with you, Shan, about photographic studios and possible and impossible archives. And her question is related to this. Your turning to a fictional diary of disappeared photographs speaks a lot about the non-existence of paper or negative archives in most photographic studios in Kolkata. So can you address this question of absent real archives and the delight then of being able to create a perfect fictional archive? And this connects to Sabina's comment as well. And she says that as a historian, she's thinking of the way that the historian Natalie Zemon Davis has talked on fiction in the archives in relation to medieval European history.
Right. So thank you for the questions for this particular thing that like I visited some of the, like, for example, which reminds me of the fire that destroyed much of Bone and Shepherd's archive. So I don't know, like, that's the first thing I got reminded of after reading the question. So, and I also checked out some of the older photographs that a bit smaller, lesser known studios of North Calcutta and a bit of on the you know, the northern downtown, much more like lesser known, and they are not really, I mean, I found this practice of giving away and like getting rid of older negatives. Most of these negatives end up in the Thapa, you know, the dumping ground on the eastern part of the Calcutta. And like, there are simply like no practice of preserving older photographs at all in most of these studios. So, and all you can, maybe all I could excavate is that the photographs which like got translated into prints, but the prints which the studio has some purpose for, like if the print turned out of like somebody who posed for a wedding photograph, and I mean, her makeup and her appearance, from her makeup and the appearance, the studio owner felt that this could be an advertisement of their photographic craft. They kept that particular print, but got away with the rest. So, but as you, even if you like don't, even if you don't find much, you always like, you always are in the, always feel like in presence of something which is not there, but could pop up in the space at any moment. So like, for example, there's this particular studio in near this place called Shithirmor near Domdom. So I accidentally found a whole bunch of prints that they took in a, I think it was a birthday, somebody's birthday in 1982. And they, for some reason, it was there. And it was like whole, like the whole roll, like all 36 prints. So, and like once in a while, like after like 10 studios, after visiting 8 or 10 studios, you might just find one like gem in this, gem like this. So, but you get to, if there are like older people in the studio, like as photographers or as technicians or as darkroom operators, like they would talk about certain stuff, and that oral history can, like in many cases it did for me, like from their words, from their recollections, I constructed a bit of imagery myself and then tried to translate it into photograph in the book.
There are comments, and our audience is saying really quite generous and wonderful things about the book and also the discussion. But there are no more questions. So if there are questions, could I request any of you, if you have any burning questions, perhaps we can take one more because we're already over time. Okay, so Manas and Madhuban ask that, taking off from Taupati's question, you could maybe talk a bit more about how the fragment is so important for the conception of this work. Each photograph is a portal into a nested story, which the viewer or reader needs to unpack from the fragmentary text-image assemblage.
I have to read it again.
Yeah, okay.
Right. So, like, I think as an answer for this question, I would think I would recall a particular incident that like this one of like our like in my like wide friend circle, there's this older person who like always, like, for example, he before this pandemic started, right before the pandemic started, he was saying that you are like children of today, you don't know what a curfew is. And after that, in 7 days, there was a curfew. So like he has a penchant of making this very like unsavory predictions. So there was a incident where he narrated this, that like one of his neighbors had a particular clock which used to appear in like which appeared in a like a sort of family photograph, but like it like unintentionally it had appeared in a photograph taken in much later on. So I took that like as an idea to incorporate that particular clock in a particular photograph, but also like spoke about it, well, also thought of speaking about it, but not include it to a certain extent. But I rather decided I'd rather keep this in the photo and let the viewer discover it, and then maybe like think of how it doesn't really belong in that particular period detailing. Like there are like 2 or 3 conscious mistakes in the period detailing of all the photos where I kept a certain thing which does not really belong there, but it provides a clue of a larger narrative, if you could call it that.
There are no more questions right now. Again, there is a follow-on question. And both Manas and Madhuban ask, can we locate this work in a post-truth world rife with fake news and manufactured events, where photographs have become suspect and fraught, and the conventional indexical empirical relationship to truth, reality, and so on is severely eroding? Asking also because an important formal choice in the work, it pretends to be found photographic documents, but is in fact an elaborately staged fiction, which the viewer is not actually readily let in on when they encounter and they read the book.
Yeah, of course, definitely. I mean, that's like in 21st century, this would like the fake photographs and the whole thing about like staged image and like photographs, stage photographs trying to pass off as real. I mean, has like the era of post-truth and all that. I mean, that is quite like, we don't, at this point, we as viewers, we are so sensitized by like receiving a stage photograph as real that we often like fail to address like to respond like we should in a particular gruesome real image. If we encounter a real gruesome image which is too gruesome to be true, the first reaction of a viewer is to, oh, this is fake, and we reject it readily. So the veracity of photographs as like true, the evidence of truth has already been desensitized to a certain point, especially in this decade, from the 2010s.
Well, we'll share the many comments, which are, as I said, openings to several conversations with all the panelists. And perhaps you could choose to continue those conversations directly with some of the people.
So are we ready to wrap up, Latika?
I think so. There aren't, yeah.
Are we running out of time?
We're over time, but yeah, that's all right. I think, we've got a lot of people still listening.
All right. Well, I think that we've got a lot of very interesting ideas, and especially what came up towards the end about the idea of photograph kind of losing its value as something that is evidentiary. And honestly, it's something that has happened not right now, but has been talked about from the time of digital interventions and how digital interventions can actually transform photographs. There's been a huge debate among filmmakers, particularly, and documentary filmmakers have particularly kind of engaged with the idea of the conventions of documentary filmmaking, the conventions of photorealism, and how that kind of is inadequate. And from the 90s itself, we find that documentaries are being made across the world, which are using a kind of a speculative mode, which is kind of blurring the distinctions between fact and fiction. And we see a kind of a emergence of a kind of a hybrid mode. And it is still kind of emerging as a very important dramatic form. So I think these questions are very important, and filmmakers have been practitioners of both still and moving images, have been addressing these questions. And I think that even this book tries to address it in the manner with the aesthetic of clutter without, and of course, Rimley has also pointed out that there are certain kinds of coherences that perhaps, she would have liked, to be more ruptured. But she too has done a very interesting job of reading between the lines and, picking up fleeting moments that could be yet another interesting story to be told. And I think that, and of course, there are going to be a lot of us who would say that, we would like a little more about the subjectivity of this woman who is everybody's object of curiosity, or at least we would like to have one more woman who thinks of her as an object of curiosity and, probably queer it a little more. And I think that those possibilities lie in the book. And it leaves it open for us to do that kind of a reading. So I think that, Shan, thank you very much for this book that has led to this very rich conversation. And I don't think that this is going to be the end. It is probably just the beginning of many conversations that people will have about this book. I saw that somebody is already asking you for your phone number over here. And as more and more people buy the book and read the book, there's going to be more, rich discussions. And I certainly look forward to being part of all that. So here I will end, what I have to say, and also by thanking my really wonderful panel and of all the, rich things that they have brought into this discussion. Over to you, Latika.
On behalf of SSAF, I would like to thank all the panelists for agreeing to be part of this very engaging online discussion about Portal, the curious account of Achintya Bose. And, the discussion was very interesting and from different perspectives of the process and making of the images and of the book, and the history of photography and style, and from different tropes in literature. So I'd like to thank you, Shohini Ghosh, Ranu Roy Chaudhary, Rimli Bhattacharya, and Shan Bhattacharya. I thank the audience for joining us from different parts of the world and time zones and for their attention. I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce our colleagues at SSAF and thank them for their contribution to this event. Saurav Sil is Archives Manager at SSAF and has designed the invitation and managed the technical aspects of the event. And Malvika Madgulkar, Assistant Editor, Publications and Communications, has handled the communications for this discussion. Santosh Sahni is our Accounts Executive. Please do visit our website, ssaf.in, and follow us on social media for updates about forthcoming programs. Thank you all again for joining us today, and good night.